Welcome back to G Brews. It's been a little while since I've talked to you all. I actually did a batch about a week or so ago, almost 2 weeks ago now, before I went on a week's vacation, and I want to give you a quick update on it. So, a couple of additions. These are actually my fermentation chambers now. I've got actually two freezers, each hooked up to, you can see right there, two different ink birds. I actually have one fermenting right here, and it's actually fermenting at about 68 degrees. And I'll go through and show you real quick. That's what it looks like. All right, so I have a little heat lamp. Goes down there, temperature sensor with some bubble wrap on it. And I've got a little airlock. So this setup's actually been working pretty good. I got the freezer set up, what was it, probably a couple days ago? And it's impressive. I didn't realize how cold this area was getting at night. It was actually getting down to about 62 degrees, which was slowing down the fermentation. What I have in there is actually a half wheat, half Pilsen grain mix with about 10% of flake barley in there. And then I threw a whole bunch of hops in it. I'm going to let it ferment for about another week, and then I'm going to go ahead and keg it, and we'll see how it goes. So on to today's brew. I am going to be brewing an American light lager. I'm going to be calling it the Bunny Hill, I think is the name. It is 7.5 pounds of Pilsner malt and then half a pound of flaked rice. So it's going to be pretty light. Color on the SRM scale is probably going to wind up being just below 2, which is pretty light. I've also got some clarifiers that I'm going to add both on the hot side and on the cold side to try to help clarify this one. And my target is kind of a real easy drinking beer. So somewhere between like 3.2 and maybe 3.8, maybe 4 on the high side from an alcohol percentage content when I'm done. But I'll go ahead and kind of walk you through where I am. So I've got my bag of grain and rice. I've got my kettle set up. I don't have any of my hoses set up, but I'm not sure what I had set up last time when we talked, but I got all my hoses hanging up there so that way they kind of dry out and just drip right there on the floor, which goes through pretty easy. I redid my workbench, lowered it, added the 2 lights up so it makes it a little bit easier to come through. I still need to move the electrical a little bit. I don't have enough electrical down here quite yet, so everything is running off of that one power strip on the back. But I've got my CO2 tank and my own fridge here for the yeast and for the hops. As I mentioned, this recipe is going to be really simple. I'm going to dump in, I got to mill the grain first, and then I am going to, let's see, what is it, a 60-minute mash? And then I'm going to actually mash out for 10 minutes, sparge, and then go into a 60-minute boil. And my goal is to wind up with roughly about 5 gallons of beer at the end of the boil. And then I'm going to put in at the beginning about 3/10 of an ounce of Hallertauer. I think that's the right way to pronounce the hops that I'm using. And then I'm going through and actually working with, I'm trying a dry yeast this time. I was having a little bit of trouble finding the packets of yeast that I got. So I got a, here, I'll show you. So here's the yeast that I'm trying this time. Let me see if I can actually get it where you can read it. All right, so it is a Lager 3470. I got 2 packets of this since I'm going to be doing a bigger bracket or a bigger bucket. And on vacation we went up to Whistler, so I was actually able to stop by Backcountry Brewing and pick up some beer to drink that week. I just really like the old school sunset pictures, so I picked those up. But I think this is going to be a pretty simple brew. My goal is to, first thing I do is go ahead, run some sanitizer through all the equipment, make sure everything's clean. And then I am going to jump into brewing. So the first thing I'm going to do is get to milling the grain. So here's my milling setup, grain mill. I've got most of my 7.5 pounds of Pilsner malt in there. And I'm just going to go ahead and start milling it. So I ran into a small problem. I forgot how much grain could actually fit in this bowl, so I had to switch real quick, and I ended up using this bucket. Luckily, I have a whole bunch of buckets that are open. And what I'll do is I'll just combine the two of them together. And you can see I actually milled it in a very fine manner. I want to try to get extract all the sugars out of that, so that way it's easier to dump in. So now I'm going to go ahead, fill this up with water, and then I'm also going to fill up my hot water tank and put probably about 5 gallons in there just to have in case I need it. So this is how I fill up my water. You can see I have a little hose spigot over there. I just have a little clear hose coming over here, and I'm going to measure out about 6.5 gallons of water to start with. So I have my brewing bucket going, and you can start to see just a little bit of bubbles coming up from the heating element. And then I also put 6 gallons of water in here, and that's just going to help me just to keep it clean a little bit. Throw the lid on there, and I've got it set to about 170 degrees. It's got 2 different elements on the side. You can see both of them are running, so that'll get up to about 170. Important note, this little ball valve here, as I was filling it up, you can see the plywood a little different colored. Yeah, I didn't have that closed, so I was trying to film and fill that up, and all of a sudden I noticed the floor was getting wet. So there's a lot of learning going on in this process, and one of the biggest things is to make sure that I check each of the steps as I go through. For example, last night I was playing around. I'm actually taking a course from Cornell on hop characteristics right now, and we had to do some hop tea, and I was not paying attention the way that I should have been, and I actually used ounces instead of grams. For anybody who knows, there's a really big difference. Instead of a tea, I wound up with a little slurry. So it's an important reminder to pay attention to what you're doing as you're doing all this. But yeah, so working along. You can see right now I got the temperature set to 149, which is what's going to be my mash temperature. And right now the temperature is about 56. So I'm going to sit here and wait for it to heat up, and then I'll throw the grain basket in and set up the circulation. So it usually takes anywhere from 2 to 3 hours to do a batch of brewing. Right now for me, I'll probably end up getting a little bit faster as I learn more. But a couple of questions I've gotten from some of my friends is, what do I listen to? Right now I'm kind of on a Morgan Wallen kick, Warren Ziders, a big country kick. And then the other thing you can see right behind me, I set up a dartboard. So I just like playing darts. So I got all the hoses hooked up here, right? So you can see the first one is coming out of the keg or the brew pot to my pump. Comes around into my manifold, right? And I've got the manifold set up to be able to go through back up to the top for recirculation, over to my plate chiller for when I'm done, and then I have a return from there. And then I also have the ability to pump hot water, and so this is for the sparge. So I've got another hose hanging up over here. I'll connect to the out of that pump, go into right here, and that'll connect the little sprayer and just kind of slowly work its way through as I start pulling everything out. So now it's just a waiting game. We're about halfway up to the 149 degrees. It's just a waiting game to let the water get up to temperature, and then we'll start brewing. So, take 2. I actually ended up going through and remember that it's been almost 2 weeks since I brewed. So I ended up converting that last run of water into sanitizer, ran it through the whole system for about 10 minutes just to make sure everything was good and clean. And now I am back off and heating up the water. So I have my 6.5 gallons of water, tap water going in. You can see the temperature is actually going down because I just put the thermal well or the sensor back in the thermal well there. So that was the last thing that I did. And I've got my new water going in. You can see it's heating. And my boil kettle's up to about 98 degrees. So I'll have plenty of hot water. Thinking back, I probably should have just taken the hot water and dumped the hot water in here. That would have made things a little bit faster, and then just refilled that. But that's a note that I will take for next time. So the mash has begun. I've got my mash in here. I just dumped it in and just stirred it. Set it for 149. It dropped down to 147 and it's coming back up now. And I'm gonna let it go for about half an hour, just sitting here at 149, and I'll stir it occasionally. And then with 30 minutes left, I'm actually gonna start a recirculation to try to compact the bed a little bit and start adding a little bit of filtering to that. So when I do the mash out and pull the grain out, hopefully it'll help filter out any of the some of the stuff floating in the wort itself. So check back in about an hour or so. So in preparation, because I'm doing an American lager, I am prepping my fermentation chamber. And by that, I just have my Inkbird turned on here. And you can see I just have the temperature probe just hanging in there. Because my plan is to pitch the yeast at around 50 degrees. I want to have the freezer sitting at 50 degrees to start with. And that way, if I need to, I can throw the wort in that, settle the temperature, and then pitch the yeast a little bit later if I need to. But my goal is to use the wort chiller to be able to get it as close to 50 degrees as possible. So I'm about 30 minutes into the mash, and I set up my recirculation. And with this setup, I actually have the control for the pump here. So I just hit this button. You can hear the pump come on. And I had actually tested it before. So this first lever controls this tube right here, which loops back around in here. And then you can just see it's a nice little mist, nice little bit of water coming in. And the idea behind this is that grain bed is going to slowly get compacted down and act as a natural filter. So once the mash is done and I do the mash out at the elevated temperature, it will actually start to go through and filter out some of the stuff that's floating in the wort as a whole. So we'll let this go for about half an hour, and then I'm gonna raise the temperature up to 170 to mash out for 10 minutes. And then start adding the water as I slowly lift the grain basket out, and then we'll be on to our boil. So I just completed the 60-minute mash, and to mash out, all I'm going to do is just change this temperature to be 170. And then once it reaches 170, I will start a 10-minute timer. And then I'll pull the grain out and go ahead and start the boil. So I just completed the 10-minute mash out, and here's the setup that I have. So I have my pulley rigged up. I'm gonna slowly pull this up and then rinse the grains to get as much of the sugar off them as possible. So I pulled the grain bed out. I actually added a little too much water in the sparge. So I may have to boil for a little bit longer because target amount is about 5 gallons, and I actually added 2 gallons of water instead of 1. Went a little faster than expected. So I just put the heating element up at 90%, and you'll see it's gonna just start going through and boiling. And then once it starts to boil, I'm gonna go ahead and start the hour-long timer, and we'll see how it goes. So I've got about 3 minutes left in the boil. And as you can see, I've got a very vigorous boil going here. And I've got my plate chiller all set up. Got the exit tube for the cold water going into the sink, coming through. And this way I can actually see what the temperature is coming out of it. I may actually have to go a little bit long. I'm gonna check the gravity right at the hour mark. And if it's not where I want it to be, then I am going to boil off a little bit more water. But I will wait for the next 10 minutes and see what the gravity looks like. So this is how I have the wort chiller. Comes out of there, goes into my pump, up here into the manifold, and then goes into the plate chiller, which I have coming in there. That's the noise for some reason. There's air in it or something. The exit is right there. I'm clearing up the hop spider while I'm doing this as well. And you can see we're down to just over 60 degrees coming out of the plate chiller. Right now, we're hovering right around 99 in the actual brew bucket itself. Since this is a lager, I need to be able to pitch the yeast at about 50 degrees. So I'm gonna chill it as much as I can here, put it in a bucket, and then put it in the freezer to drop it down to 50, and then pitch the yeast at that point. So, brew day is complete, well, at least the brewing part. I actually have to go to a 2-hour work meeting, so I'm actually not going to be able to go through and do a full clean. But what I'm doing for right now is I have that sanitizer from earlier. I'm just running it through everything, just kind of getting it clean. Right now the plate chiller is getting cleaned out. Each of these lines are getting cleaned out. But here's what I've got. So I've got it set 50 degrees. Here's my setup with the airlock, and I've got the heat lamp if I need it. But yeah, that's my setup. So now to wait, I think this is going to be at least a 2 or 3 week fermentation. I have some friends coming over in just over 3 weeks. So I'll probably let this ferment for 2 weeks and then throw it in a keg and put it in my kegerator to lager it for another week and then keg it. So we'll see how it goes. I hope you all have a great day, and don't forget, be kind.